Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our International People's Tribunal on US Imperialism. Today's event is part of a series of hearings over the course of several months this year in which we discuss the impact of sanctions, blockades, and other economic coercive measures on countries across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Pacific. Our first country hearing last month was on Zimbabwe, and it was followed up 2 weeks ago with the hearing on North Korea. Both of these hearings were filled with excellent testimonies, and videos for both are available on the Sanctions Tribunal website, which is sanctionstribunal.org. Today, we're going to shift our focus, I should say, to Libya. Our conversations today will have also an Arabic translation. And in fact, one of our witnesses will be presenting in Arabic, and his presentation will be available in English as well. So before I move forward, I want to ask Charlotte Cates to share how to access the Arabic or English versions of the presentations. So Charlotte.
Thank you so much to all of you for being with us today, and thank you to all of our rapporteurs, jurors, and speakers for being with us today. We have interpretation enabled. If you are using Zoom on your computer, please go to the globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen and choose either Arabic or English, and this will allow you to hear the proceedings in either Arabic or English, including when we have speakers who speak in Arabic, to hear that in English, and if we have speakers in English, to hear them in Arabic. Thank you very much to Ali, who is interpreting for us today. If you are using your phone and not your computer, please use the 3 dots that you see in the Zoom menu to choose language options and then to choose your language that way. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. Now, as I mentioned, today's focus is Libya. Libya was the victim to a vicious imperialist invasion by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in 2011. That decimated the country and whose effects resonate to today. Libya today continues to suffer from more insidious Western incursions into the country's political and economic affairs. But as with any invasion, there's a deeper history that laid the groundwork for the United States and European-led invasion in 2011. The history of sanctions against Libya, including those imposed by the United States, will garner close scrutiny today. Along with their economic impact, sanctions and other economic coercive measures often lead to more direct actions by imperialist powers, including military invasions. So Libya is not only an historical case that deserves close consideration in its own right, given this history, but it's also an example of how no imperialist power, and specifically no Western power, ever enters another country with the intent of quote unquote liberating. So Libya is a cautionary tale in this respect. So this leads me to our conversation for today. Our speakers today include Matteo Capasso, Essam El-Khourgli, Dr. Mustafa Zaidi, Hamza Al-Toumi, and Murad El-Sadawi. So each speaker is going to have their time to speak. And before each testimony, each witness testimony, I'm going to provide a brief bio for each person. Our first speaker today is Matteo Capasso, who is the Marie Curie Global Fellow between Columbia University in the United States and the University of Venice in Italy. Matteo has worked on the political history and political economy of Libya since 2013, and drawing on an extensive collection of oral histories. His monograph, Everyday Politics in the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, reconstructs the last 2 decades of the country's politics, leading up to the 2011 events that sanctioned its fall. More recently, his work relies on archival sources from the US State Department, from the CIA, from the United Nations, and also Libyan governmental documents to reconstruct the impacts of US-led imperialist policies on Libya from 1969 to the present. Since 2013, he's been working for Middle East Critique as well. So Matteo, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Navid. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, no, because sometimes my connection tells me that it's unstable. So should there be any problems, please let me know. I mean, despite I'm being in the Imperial Core in New York, it doesn't seem that the infrastructure is as good. So Well, first, I want to thank you, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to share my expert testimony with you today. After the hearings on Zimbabwe and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, today we are faced to discuss another blatant case of imperial arrogance and power unleashed on another developing country of the global south, one that has taken place across the course of the past 60 years, and the country we're talking about is obviously Libya. Ever since the Great Revolution of 1st September 1969, Libya has had to face various forms of imperialist aggression, which included measures of economic coercion, military bombings, and covert sponsoring of attempted coup. All measures undertaken to threaten, discipline, subvert, or outrightly destroy the sovereignty of a country that has dared to establish its own independent path to political and economic development. Why did everything start in 1969? Well, because on September 1st, 1969, a group of 70 very young officers from the armed forces decided to overthrow the Western Allied monarch in a bloodless coup d'etat. This military operation, whose code name was Jerusalem in honor of the Palestinian cause, was followed by the removal of US and UK military bases from Libyan soil and the nationalization of foreign petroleum companies. And these are just some of the most important measures that the revolutionary government took to regain its right to social, economic, and political development. This was the time of decolonization for Libya. Since then, however, US-led imperialist forces have followed a policy of aggression vis-à-vis Libya. That policy has been expressed in various forms of action, including the following. Imposed as early as 1973, US economic sanctions started with a refusal to sell 8 Lockheed C-130 Hercules airplanes that Libya had already paid for. In 1981, the US upgraded these sanctions by imposing controls on the export of aircraft, spare parts, and avionics to limit Libya's capacity to support, unquote, from CIA documents, military adventures in neighboring countries. Then, in 1992, unilateral economic sanctions became multilateral when the US and UK mobilized the United Nations Security Council to impose an air embargo, together with a prohibition to sell arms or supply aircraft spare parts. These sanctions lasted until the early 2000s. The nature of these sanctions, as we shall discuss throughout this hearing, was so comprehensive that it affected all the economic and infrastructural sectors, with major consequences for the people of Libya. By 1994, UN documents revealed that just 2 years into the sanctions regime, as much as 9,000 medical patients had to be treated outside of the country, since Libya was not allowed to access the necessary equipment to do so. Medical staff reduction at the same time had seriously impaired the functioning of the health service, strongly dependent on the expertise of foreign doctors, like many other industrial sectors. Then we are told by conventional experts that Libya during those years was still able to maintain a somewhat normal level of oil output, being an oil-rich country during the 90s, sometimes even higher to the previous decades. Well, this analysis completely ignored that the economic consequences of the embargo translated into a steep depreciation of the currency, thus inflation, and a price increase of consumer goods equal to 200% above their usual level. Currency instability in developing countries is a key manifestation of US imperialism, and it entails a highly uneven spatial distribution of financial vulnerability and deflationary adjustment. But sanctions, dear members of the jury, were never the only measures that the imperialist forces unleashed to provoke or assault the then Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. From 1975 to 1980 alone, the US committed more than 150 violations of Libyan airspace. The impunity of these violations culminated with the bombing of the cities of Benghazi and Tripoli, including the direct bombing of the residence of the Libyan leader, on April 15, 1986, with the Operation El Dorado Canyon. What's interesting about this operation is that we were told by the US government that the operation had taken place as a result of a so-called terrorist attack, which had happened 10 days earlier in Berlin, where 2 Americans and 1 Turkish woman died. For the US government, it took barely 10 days to indict the Libyan regime as responsible for the attack, citing the existence of, unquote, undisputable proof. Well, it nevertheless took 15 years and the fall of the Berlin Wall for German prosecutors to establish that there was no proof that Colonel Gaddafi was behind the attack, a failure which the court blamed on, unquote, the limited willingness of the German and US governments to share intelligence. The existence of suspicions lacking any proof, as our expert also today, Mustafa Fitori, will discuss, also provided the case for the imposition of UN multilateral sanctions for over a decade. But again, Western power, especially the US and the UK, did not limit themselves to this measure. They also sponsored covert action inside and outside the country. They, in fact, in the 1980s, the US, together with the military assistance of Israel and the economic support of Saudi Arabia, created two different opposition groups: the National Front for the Salvation of Libya, led by Muhammad Mugarif, and the Libyan National Liberation Army, a group of Contras whose commander was Colonel Khalifa Haftar. The group of Contras consisted of approximately 2,500 former Libyan soldiers who had been captured as prisoners of war in Chad. In the 1990s, two British intelligence instead, the MI6 and MI5, supported the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which unsuccessfully challenged the regime throughout the 90s. The group mainly consisted of the so-called Libyan Afghans who had joined the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 90s to fight against the Soviets. Their logistical base was Manchester in the UK. It seemed that all these measures had reached an end when in 2003 the multilateral sanctions were finally lifted. But we all know what happened in 2011 in Libya. On March 13, 2011, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, establishing a no-fly zone over Libya and authorizing the use of any necessary means to avoid the so-called humanitarian tragedy. A few days later, an international coalition of 18 countries initiated the military operation Odyssey Dawn, initially led by AFRICOM and then by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The UN authorized, we were told, a humanitarian intervention in order to support a popular uprising. We were told that by protecting the lives of the Libyan people, something that the international community had not done during the previous year, the humanitarian intervention was going to pave the way for a democratic government. We all know today what happened. Today's Libya is not only a failed state, but it continues to suffer from the imposition of the asset freeze of its sovereign wealth funds that took place in 2011, another form of economic sanctioning, which was used to prevent the former government from accessing its financial resources. Dear members of the jury, I would like to conclude by making 2 points, which I hope they will help you to formulate your decision on the nature of these measures that US imperialism has viciously and arrogantly imposed on the people of Libya over the course of history. First, sanctions are only one among many forms of imperialist warfare. They operate in conjunction with open or covert strategies, including coup d'etat, funding of opposition, direct bombings. Sanctions are a form of warfare, and warfare has been central and instrumental to uphold a global project of domination of the global south by US-led imperialism. It has an impending duty for the progressive forces of this world to support fully the process of decolonization, not a truncated one. All these measures have posed over and over significant limits and obstacles to the development of these global south countries that, like Libya, aim to carve their own independent path to social, political, and economic development. Second, throughout all this year, Libya has been subjected to forms of imperialist aggression, which the international community, US-led, always justified, including the sanctions, saying that Libya was seeking the production of weapons of mass destruction and or supporting the international terrorism. Well, if the United States imagined that Libya was trying to manufacture weapons of mass destruction and hoped by this act to prevent the spread of such weapons, then one has to ask which state it is that is stockpiling those weapons. Is it not the United States itself that has the largest stockpile of weapons and that adds to it by acquiring by acquiring nuclear material from other countries? Is it not the United States that is endangering international security and the security of the Arab region by supporting Israel as it accumulates nuclear weapons and develops its expertise in that domain? Similarly, I would like to point out that if the imperialist powers were so concerned about terrorism, then one should ask why the imperialist powers have had no problem in accepting the persistence of the Zionist terror over the Palestinians for more than 70 years. One should just think that at the empty reactions that Western officials continue to have nowadays in 2023, as in just 3 months, the Zionist state has killed already 66 Palestinians. I raise these doubts because, as my extensive research allows me to document, terrorism for the various US administration very often translated into the Libyan government persistence to undermine Zionism militarily or ideologically in the Arab region, in the United Nations, or among African states. Libya not only provided military support, training, and funding to various Palestinian factions. In 1977, Tripoli hosted the first international symposium on Zionism and racism, where renowned scholars, including Edward Said, participated to discuss the racist premise of Zionism. This followed the famous UN General Assembly Resolution 3379, condemning Zionism as a form of racism in 1975. In 1982, the Libyan government established Al-Matab al-Alamiya, the World Center, which aimed to gather progressive revolutionary forces in the fight against imperialism, Zionism, racism, and reaction. It appears, therefore, that the imperialist powers targeted the Libyan state every time that the latter tried to support the aspiration and human rights of the Palestinian people. There is no doubt that the dialectical relationship exists between the liberation of Palestine and sovereign development throughout the whole Arab region. Conversely, we cannot divorce the targeting and sanction of the Libyan regime from the imperialist support towards a settler colonial formation that, as much as the US, incubates a mode of consciousness that promotes imperialist values and secures US-led interests, namely Israel. Dear members, I want to thank you for this opportunity again to share my expert testimony with you. I avoided to enter into the details of each and every measure that I listed, but I'll be more than happy to provide further details and clarification if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matteo. Our next witness is Essam El-Khourgli. Essam is a Libyan PhD student at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He researches Libya's modern history, state ideology, and the impact of imperialism on education. He is also a labor organizer at his university and is on the steering committee of the global Pan-African movement in North America. Essam, welcome.
Dear comrades, friends, and members of the jury, thank you for granting me the opportunity to read the following statement handed to me directly by the former Minister of Health in Libya, Dr. Mustafa Zaidi. Dr. Zaidi is a witness of not only micro-struggles of the Libyan people under a regime of sanctions, but also as a government official who pledged to serve his country's health sector and how the state's role in providing accessible healthcare was inhumanely denied by forces of imperialism. The statement by Dr. Mustafa Zaidi reads, so this is what he sent me. Thank you everyone for this opportunity. Regarding sanctions, sanctions is a dirty part of the new type of war used by the Western countries against many countries. Of course, it affects normal people. They say it will affect the government, its capabilities to work out against Western countries. But in a matter of fact, it really affects ordinary people because sanctions don't know who is in power and who is not, who is ruling and who is not. When you impose sanctions on any country, that means you're imposing sanctions on the individuals. After the Second World War, sanctions were used mainly in the 60s against Cuba and against socialist countries. And so it created a gap of development between different countries. And it is a sort of monopoly that monopolized the technology, information, and the different techniques to improve civil sectors in different countries, not only the military sector. During the Cold War, the sanctions were used many times in different areas, but during the apartheid era in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, And all these countries, the Western countries, don't impose sanctions on the apartheid regimes. Instead, against the revolutionary countries, the first weapon used to stop the revolutions in the Third World and their liberation movements is to use sanctions against those countries. In Libya, after the 1st of September revolution and the evacuation of the 3 bases, the American, the British military bases, and the Italian existence in Libya, which was remnant from the fascist regime before the Second World War, they started imposing different types of sanctions. First, they prevent the Libyan students from studying some sort of education in the United States and some European countries, studying nuclear technology, studying airplanes, and all these things, they were prevented or prohibited for Libyan students, and this remained for a very long time. In the 80s, they started imposing the sanctions during the Reagan regime against the oil industry and electric industry. And also they make restriction on Libyan students studying in the United States of America. Many of the students who were sent back home and the sanction on the petrol and the electric and the atomic energy technology and the aviation technology was imposed strictly. And not only the American companies, but other companies, West European companies that wanted to work with Libya also were susceptible to different types of sanctions. Why was it imposed? Because the government in Libya was acting against the will of the Western countries, especially the United States of America. And because of the Libyan government at the time has played a very important role in the liberation movements in the African continent, the South American continent, and the Asian continent. And as a response to the strong support of the Libyan government at the time and Libyan people to the Palestine cause, because the Palestine issue was one of the main issues of interest for the Libyan people as part of the Arab nation. And to prevent Libya from supporting the Palestinian liberation movement, the African liberation movements, and the anti-apartheid organization and movements, sanctions were imposed on the Libyan government. In the 80s, the sanctions were increased step by step. And not only atomic energy and technology or oil technology or aviation technology or electric technology, sanctions also were applied to the medical treatment. They prevent selling some equipment using atomic energy for several purposes. They have prevented American companies in the medical sector from working with Libyan institutions. And this was also widened step by step. In 1992, after the so-called Lockerbie accident, sanctions were imposed officially not only from the United States, but the United States of America imposed its will on the Security Council. And the strange decision from the Security Council under Chapter 7 of the United Nations bylaws had imposed very strong sanctions that prevented air travel from and to Libya, prevent to give any service to Libyan airplanes, stop any commercial connections between Libya and other countries, and prevent the transfer of money from Libyan banks and the use of hard currencies. And this is a very important point I want to explain. If you have a contract with, for example, with a German company and you want to pay with US dollars, the dollar has to go to some place in New York, so you could not transfer the money. Of course, that means this sanction on money transfer and freezing of the Libyan deposits in Western countries have prevented Libya from buying its requirements from medicine, from food, materials, from any other civilian item. They say in the Security Council sanction decision, no, we exclude medicine and we exclude food. But as a matter of fact, medicine and food and everything was affected strongly by sanctions. And the Libyan companies have to go through very complicated ways to transfer money and to make the letter of guarantees from banks. Because if we wanted to open a letter of guarantee, it had to be opened through British or German or American banks. And these banks were imposing sanctions on the Libyan money transfer. So it was a very bad sanction. It has strongly affected all sectors in Libya: education, health service, communication, transportation, everything. And Libyan people have to go thousands of kilometers to travel outside. And as you know, Libya is a big country. It is 2,000 kilometers on the coast, 2,000 kilometers from the north to the south, around 2 million quadrant kilometers. So it is a very wide country with a small and sparse population. And the distance between cities are very big and huge. And so average transportation is very important. And if you have a restriction on transport sector, or when your sanctions are affecting the transports, that means all the life was affected for the ordinary Libyan people. Also, we couldn't mobilize our airplanes efficiently in Libya because we couldn't get spare parts. And we have a very bad accident in the 90s, late 90s. One civilian airplane was crashed down because they don't have enough spare parts. And to get a spare part for an airplane for Libya at the time, it was a very complicated process. You have to go through the black market, through money mediators. And I think this is clear now. So sanctions affect all sectors, not only the sectors to which the sanctions was directed at, but other sectors like health, for example. And the health sector was affected very much through various mechanisms. Number one, we could not buy the original medicine from America and from other countries. Number two, and if some countries don't impose sanctions on medicine, as I have said previously, medicine could not be bought because of the transfer of money was impossible. Opening letters of guarantees was impossible. So we have to direct our needs of medicines from other countries, maybe with less efficiency. Number three, the third part which affected the medical, not only the medicine, but also the medical equipment. Many of the medical equipment were made in the United States. And you know, something is very strange we have to pay attention to, that when they make sanctions, you are not sanctioning only the machine as a whole, but the machine has a part of it made in the United States. It should not be sold to Libya. So many of the medical equipment, advanced medical equipment, have some part of it, it's manufactured in the United States. So we could not buy CT scanners, MRIs, and ultrasound and hectographs. All of these machines, advanced machines, we couldn't buy it. So we had to buy either secondhand from other countries or we buy less efficient machines from other places. Fourth point, the fourth thing that affected the medical sector was the medical personnel. As you know, Libya is a newly developed country. In 1969, only 5 or 7 Libyan doctors existed. So in the 70s and 80s, we depend very much in the health sector on medical staff from different countries, from the Philippines, from Britain, from Ireland, from Germany, from everywhere. When there was a sanction, it was very difficult for somebody to work to get money to a country which had sanctions imposed on it. Doctors could not travel directly by airplanes. Doctors could not transfer easily their money. So the manpower in the medical sector was strongly affected in Libya. And we have to train then Libyan staff quickly. And of course, that wasn't as efficient as a very well-trained staff from outside. The fifth thing is the possibility of sending Libyan medical staff to be trained outside because of the money transfer problems, travel problems. We couldn't send as much as we needed of doctors, nurses, technicians to be trained outside. The sanctions were lifted in 2003 and step by step until 2008, but was imposed back even more strongly and more seriously in 2011. And in 2011, there was a total embargo on Libya. You could not import anything, medicine, food, nothing, fuel, nothing could be imported, and nothing goes in and out. And then NATO, led by the United States, have started its bombardment of Libya, not only air bombardment, but from the sea as well. And long-distance missiles, and of course, troops on the ground, lots of soldiers from France, from England, from Germany, from the United States, from Turkey, from Qatar, from some other Arab countries, were fighting on the ground in Libya till the breakdown of the regime. I think also the Libyan investments outside were, of course, seriously affected by the embargo. Its facilities, its money was frozen because they say it is the money of the Gaddafi, and it is nonsense, a propaganda they have propagated. And also the personnel in those facilities could not work freely. The money from the investment of Libyan companies outside of Libya could not be transferred elsewhere. So there was a thing that seriously affected the Libyan people. And up to today, you know, the embargo, the sanctions still affecting the life of the Libyan people. Libya is still under the 7th chapter of the United Nations. And I think it is a crime. What was done by the United States alone in the 80s and through the Security Council by the 90s and through the Security Council again in 2011 is a crime against humanity. We hope that the International People's Tribunal on US imperialism and other progressive organizations will pay attention to this. We want these crimes of collective punishment to be investigated. We are not making propaganda. Come and see what has happened in Libya. See the real effect of what they have done in many cases against the normal Libyan people. They destroyed the country. More importantly, they have destroyed the people of Libya. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Assam. And thank you also to Dr. Mustafa Zaidi for that statement as well. Our next witness is Mustafa Fitori. Mustafa Fitori is a Libyan academic and an award-winning freelance journalist. He's worked with international news outlets, including CNN, BBC, and TRT. He's also a recipient of the EU's Freedom of the Press Prize. Mustafa, you have about 20 minutes for your presentation, and thank you for agreeing to provide your witness testimony today.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for the organizers and the rapporteurs, and as well as members of the jury for granting us the opportunity to talk about Libya in a different way, the kind of way you don't really hear much about in the Western mainstream media, the other side of the coin, if you like. And from what we have heard so far, I would have recommended, had I been asked to have somebody who could play the role of the devil advocate in this instance. And it would be kind of very interesting to hear the justifications offered as a representative of the US foreign policy that led to so much destruction, death, and misery all over the world, not just in Libya. And talking about the American imperialism, I would also say that Libya becoming a victim of the same imperialism that many other countries had been the victim of, that foreign policy, if you like, or imperialism, hegemony. The American wish to dominate the world in their own way and run it in their own way. And I don't want to go back into history, but I would just say, mainly if we look very carefully at the sanctions and all the other punitive measures the United States have taken against Libya, especially between 1969, when Gaddafi rose to power, until 2011 when he was murdered, we discover two main reasons or trends, if you like. Most of the animosity, if you like, between the United States and Libya after 69, starting as early as 1972, just after Gaddafi came to power, 2 years after he came to power. Most of it actually has to do not really with Libya itself, but mostly with Libya's policies, either in Africa or in the region, the Middle East, vis-a-vis, for example, the Libyan position concerning the Palestinian issue, as Matteo early on have explained. And it has to do later on with the Libyan foreign policy towards Africa, the idea of the African Union, which transpassed the African Unity Organization and became the African Union, was born in Libya. It was created in Libya. And the Sahel and Sahara community, whose membership extends to all African countries, about 39 member states of this small organization, was actually a Libyan initiative that started in the late 1990s. And what I'm trying to say, most of the animosity has to do with the Libyan foreign policy, which does not necessarily mean that it somehow steps over the foot of the United States in any region. But it's a state, it's a country like any other country, and it has the right under all international relevant laws, as well as the United Nations Charter, to conduct itself in the best way it sees fit to serve its own national interests. And if we use some kind of analogy, it's like if you are coming up now in 2023 and trying to impose sanctions in the US. Why? Because it's supporting Ukraine, or any other country because it's supporting Russia. And that's what it's nothing. It's like if you are imposing sanctions in Zimbabwe, for example, because Zimbabwe refused to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So it was most of it with Libya like that, because what Libya is doing, which is not necessarily and never had prevented the US from breaching its values or following up persistently on its national interests across the world. So that was the first reason. The second reason itself has to do with the kind of the government we had in Libya after '69, after Gaddafi rose to power. This is a government that came in with full of hopes and trying to rebuild the country, left its people from poverty and tried to improve the lives of all Libyans within the Libyan borders itself. So the first thing, and wanted to be independent in exercising its policies and its vision for the country. So the first thing they did, Gaddafi and company, was to expel the foreign bases, including the biggest American airbase, used to be known as Wales Air Base, just about, it used to be about 5 kilometers from where I'm talking to you now. Of course, they did that in 1970, just a few months after Gaddafi came to power. And if you don't know about Wales, it was the biggest American ever airbase outside the American borders, abroad. And it was built in the idea of, confronting the Warsaw Pact at the time. So the two main reasons for all the sanctions, all the animosity, as well as the attempts to kill Gaddafi himself, the American attempts, as well as the British attempts to kill the man himself, actually accumulated over time and created what we witnessed, in 2011. Now, the biggest probably moment that the Americans, hegemony caught the regime in Libya by the neck and was just about to hang it, came in 21st of December 1988, when the American airline Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie in Scotland. And in November 91, just a couple of years later, the United States acting Attorney General at the time, Mr. William Barr, who just left the position under Trump less than a year ago, well, more than a year ago now. In November of 91, he came out in a news conference and accused Libya of perpetrating that crime against all odds. There was no hard evidence, material evidence, if you like, but everything was circumstantial. And the real deterioration of relations between the two countries, between the United States and Libya, and actually when the Americans actually thought they can do whatever they want with Libya now, because they moved the issue of the Lockerbie instead of being a dispute between two independent states, sovereign states that has the international forum to solve or work out, which is the International Court of Justice. Instead of having it like that, they move it to the UN Security Council, where they have a veto, of course. The Americans have a veto, and their allies, like the British and the French and so on. And they started imposing sanctions related directly to the Lockerbie affair. And they started in 92 with Resolution 731, warning Libya that sanctions are on the way, economic and everything, unless they handed over the two suspects in the Lockerbie disaster. Of course, Libya refused to do that for legal reasons as well as logical reasons. The legal side of the matter at the time was that the Montreal Convention, which governs any grievances or any rare accidents, where people are accused of planting bombs in airplanes or blowing them up or something, that convention gives the authority of the suspect citizens of that country, gives the jurisdiction over those suspects to the country of origin, in this case, Libya. But the Americans refused to go along, and they were saying, things like, you don't have any justice system in Libya, it's just Gaddafi himself. So when you talk about wars, Gaddafi, justice system is Gaddafi, education is Gaddafi, pay rises is Gaddafi, bad situations is Gaddafi, so on and so forth. So they rejected that, and because of the refusal to hand over the suspects, the Americans and their allies in the Security Council moved on and imposed Resolution 748, which came with a little bit of sanctions and started actually the agony of Libyans when they want to or have to travel abroad. Like from Tripoli, where I am now, it takes about an hour plus few minutes, an hour, 20 minutes to reach Rome directly. But because of the sanctions, whenever I want to go to Europe, to Rome or anywhere else, it could take me up to 20 hours or even 24 hours, because I have to cross the international borders by car to Tunisia, which is nearby, and then fly from there instead of flying from here directly. And as one of the earlier speakers said, sanctions, I think our colleague Mustafa Zaidi, sanctions don't affect normal people, those at the top of the pyramid of the government. It affects normal people much more and more severely than anybody else in government. And they don't see sanctions, actually don't see who's in power and who's not, and how to help those people who are not in power. And they are supposedly being targeted by the sanctions. That did not work. The sanctions at that stage did not work. Then came the UN resolution, Security Council Resolution 883 and 93, which is, was threatening something like there could be some kind of military action against the regime itself, against Libya itself, simply because they think Gaddafi is a rogue man and he's a terrorist and he has to be removed, using the pretext that he was behind the Lockerbie disaster. Of course, we know today from different facts now that Libya has nothing to do with Lockerbie at all. Even from the start, the very little hard evidence, material evidence, you could say, that were presented in the Campsite trial in 2001 to convict, that led to the conviction of one Libyan citizen who was accused of being the perpetrator of the Lockerbie disaster, was actually fabricated. We discovered that later. We know that later. Anyway, and the whole thing accumulated, kept it going on, dragging on. Even the period of improved relations between the United States and Libya that came after 2003, when Libya decided to give up its arms, possessions of material that could lead to the production of arms mass destruction, like a nuclear program and so on, chemical arms and so on. Even that, we saw some kind of openness between the two countries. The ambassador of the US came back and the embassy was opened again. The Libyan embassy was opened again in Washington, and things seemed, improving and moving in the right direction. But actually, the West, specifically the United States, never gave, they never gave up their kind of idea of getting revenge out of Gaddafi, actually, whenever the opportunity arises. And the second opportunity arose and became possible in 2011, because what happened in 2011 is just an internal matter that could happen in any country. It happened in Tunisia before Libya, it happened in Egypt before Libya, it happened in Syria at the same time as Libya, it happened in Yemen, it happened in Bahrain. Why the United States and its allies and NATO specifically did not intervene in any of those countries? They did not intervene in what they called the Arab Spring when it visited Tunisia or Egypt or any of the countries I just named, to protect the civilians. In fact, what happened in Libya was something totally different. Indeed, there were complaints, there were hardships Libyan people facing, not all of them, but quite a sizable number of the Libyan people have problems here and the country. Most of it has to do with years of sanctions from the United States and world powers, including the UK, France, and others. But then what actually started in the Western mainstream media as a popular uprising against the dictatorship of Gaddafi himself turned into, very quickly, within just 2 days, turned into an armed struggle. Those who were fighting the government at the time, in late February and early March 2011, were actually terror groups known to Libyan terror groups known to the Western countries, specifically the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which one of our colleagues, Matteo, I think, described it early on, and how they were headquarters in Manchester in the UK, and most of those people were armed very quickly. If it was really popular uprising, rejecting Gaddafi's government, rejecting the man himself, why would it turn into an armed rebellion against the government, a legitimate government, representing a country in all international forums, like including and organizations, including the United Nations at the time, Libya, known by the government of the late Gaddafi, was a member of the UN, member for regional organizations as well as international organizations. So what would you expect from any government that respects itself when a group of people, despite, regardless of how large that group is, picks up arms and starts to fight against the government? What would any respectable government do in such a situation? I don't have to answer the question, but I would just remind you that we have seen examples in the United States itself. We have seen examples of such events and how the government responded in the UK itself. And maybe I just point out something very interesting. In June 2011, with the war at its height, in Libya, I was in Libya throughout the war, the number of people who demonstrated peacefully and violently against the government of David Cameron in London and across the UK cities because of the rise in the university tuitions was at one point 800,000 people. 800,000 people. And nobody said, well, Mr. Macron, Mr. Cameron, you lost any legitimacy and you have to go. Nobody said that. Mr. Obama did not say it, but he said the same thing when just, I would say, probably 5,000, 11,000, maybe 15,000 people in different cities in Libya demonstrated against the Gaddafi regime. The following day, Mr. Obama and others came out and said, well, Mr. Gaddafi, you have lost any legitimacy and you have to go. Well, who has the right to say if Gaddafi has to go or not? I think it's up to the Libyans. It's not up to international powers, not even the UN. Even the principle of protection, responsibility to protect, which was used as a pretext to invade Libya. I call it invasion, actually, in 2011 by NATO and so many other allies, was not really a UN a principle adopted by relevant resolutions but it was a kind of, if you like, quote unquote, a recommendation. But then the criteria for the international community, if we accept that term to describe what happened over Libya in 2011, the criteria when the international community has to act to protect civilians in certain country, A or B, when you apply that criteria to Libya, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit Libya for several reasons. One, you still have a government in power in Libya that's able to protect its citizens against the minority of citizens and foreign mercenaries who sneaked into the country and picked up arms, trying to change the regime by force. Anyway, I don't want to go into much details about that, but I want to point out something very important here, that the NATO air bombardment, which continued for over 8 months in Libya in 2011, killed thousands of people, including the military soldiers and personnel, and destroyed much of the infrastructure, whether military or civilian. But what really, the side of the collateral damage, as they call it, in the American terminology, the military terminology, that I really worked on for years. I tried to research, tried to document, is the civilian collateral damage, or the civilian deaths, people, families, men and women and children, babies, who were killed by air bombardment, the NATO and company air bombardment between March and October 2011. The NATO, of course, never recognized that they killed any civilian, except in one instance in Tripoli, in Souq al-Jamaa, which is just about 2 kilometers away from me here. But the rest of it, they never recognized it. I worked very hard in this subject in collaboration with others, from outside Libya, especially an organization called Air Wars, and they have very good and informative website, Air Wars. And we documented, I was able to document something between 220 and 290 civilians, including the youngest victim, which was about 6 months old. That happened in Majer, east of Tripoli. And Air Wars, they have more capabilities and more resources than me, but they collaborated with me nonetheless. And they believe the number of civilian deaths between March 2011 and October of that year is something between 400 and 600 civilians. And I'm talking about people who were sleeping in their houses, going around about their business, and were suddenly bombed from the air. And the only ones who were bombing from the air, it was NATO and company. To date, I tried with NATO, I tried with the United States relevant authorities, I tried with different other countries. I used my connections here and there to try to find out, if there is a possibility that NATO could one day recognize these victims and consider their plight, their families' plight after what happened to them. Nonsense, of course. I remember 2015, there was a NATO event in Madrid, and somehow they invited me as a civilian, and I went there, and the undersecretary, the NATO undersecretary at the time was an American by the name, American diplomat by the name Alexander Fershbow, and I asked Fershbow in front of the audience, if you recognize the fact that you killed civilians in Libya in 2011. He said, no, we never did. We never killed anybody. Despite the fact that NATO, the organization itself, months earlier recognized at least one incident where civilians were killed because of malfunction of some kind of weapon or something.
I'm sorry, Mustafa. I just wanted to give you a 2-minute warning. If you could wrap up in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I will conclude. I will stop here, but I just want to make two points. You know, the first point is sanctions always hurt the ordinary people in any country, whether Libya, Iran, or North Korea, or any other country, you name it. So if you want to target the political system of a country, then you have to come up with some kind of revised, if you like, newly adopted charter of the United Nations that gives the room for such maneuvers at the international stage or in the international relations. And you also have to reform the entire thing, you know, that have to do with the United Nations, especially the structure of the United Nations Security Council and who has the veto. Who gave those countries the right to have the veto and not to others? I mean, what is the logic behind this? And look at the veto. What is the veto doing now vis-a-vis Ukraine? Just think about it. Because if the Russian veto, the UN Security Councils actually paralyzed, cannot do anything. It happened in many instances before when the interests of the veto holders clashed with each other. And the other point I would like to make, the United States never stopped, even today, as I talk to you, never stopped interfering in the Libyan affairs. And what they are trying to do at this time, just an extension of their imperialism, is they are trying to impose some kind of political system on the Libyans population, whereby they're pushing for legislative elections only in 2023 without any presidential election. And the reason being, they fear, as well as the British, of course, they fear that such a presidential election could be won easily by Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, which means if that happens, you know, I don't expect it to happen, I mean, the election itself. But if that happens, it means everything they have said over the years concerning their intervention in Libya, their invasion of Libya in 2011 is actually, I'm sorry to use the term, is bullshit, nonsense at all. Because if Libyans don't want Gaddafi, don't want to hear the name Gaddafi, why his son is so popular, who was accused by all kinds of, you know, accusations thrown against him. So the point is, the American imperialism is still part of the everyday life here in Libya, even though we don't see it. It doesn't manifest itself in the supermarket or somewhere, but it does many hidden things behind the scenes. Thank you so much for giving me the time, and I'm sorry if I have been too long. Thank you.
No, not at all. Thank you so much for your excellent testimony and your comments. Our next witness to present is Mr. Hamza Al-Toumi. Hamza Al-Toumi is a Libyan engineer, researcher, and archivist of the Libyan military history. He writes periodically on various electronic media and social media outlets on Libya's military history, particularly in the 1970s and 1980s. He's conducted a number of interviews with key figures who have left their mark on Libya's history and has written some of their biographies. Currently, he is making documentary films that highlight Libya's military history as well. Hamza, you have 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, everybody. And thank you for inviting me for this conversation on the imperialist sanctions on Libya during the whole 70s and 80s and 90s. And the one that I'll be focusing on is particularly the 70s, 80s on the aviation sector, both the military and the civilian. And both they present a very important aspect to an economic development in any country in the world. Due to the importance of that sector, it was central to imperialism to actually impose sanctions on this sector, particularly US and Britain's and France's interests. And as we know that Libya is a massive country, with a coastline of 2,000 kilometers, roughly on the Mediterranean. This big land has many cities and has many military bases and many ports. And so it needs aviation, both in civilian and military, to ease the transportation, and also for the military to protect the borders and to protect the country. And as we know, since the departure of the US military bases in 1970, and so it left North Africa, and this military base was evacuated from that Wales military base. And since then, the relations between the United States and the US deteriorated, particularly the aviation sector. And since that time, sanctions started to be imposed, particularly on the aviation sector, because the US has some sort of global monopoly on aviation. And as we know in the Lockerbie case, that happened in 1988, and the sanctions starting in 1992, all the flights to Libya were stopped. All the cooperation with Libya in terms of aviation stopped. And this continued until 1999. And we know, and we want to assert, that these sanctions are unjust sanctions on the Libyan people and on Libya. And the only one who gets damaged by this is the Libyan people. And there is no way that a regime can be sanctions, because sanctions cannot be targeted on an individual or a specific people. It's only a form of punishment against the whole Libyan people. It's a collective punishment against the Libyan people. And as we know, the aviation sector is one of the most important sectors for transportation, to supply and demand goods and services and so forth. And so if there's any damage in any airplane, that would really deter the safety and also the development of the country when there's an embargo. And Libya tried to repair its own airplanes, but these are usually done in agreements with foreign companies. So, for example, the Libyan Arab Airlines had a contract with French companies that had deals with Air France, and so the Air France was meant to do 727 Boeing airplanes repairs, and other airplanes. France was contracted to renew Libyan planes. These companies continued their contractual agreements, and they continued to offer their spare parts until sanctions were imposed in 1992, 15th of March. And when the no-fly zone was imposed on Libya. So since that time, all French and foreign companies stopped providing recurring repairs to any planes. And so this directly impacted the Libyan air fleet. And so Libya was impeded from repairing and renewing its fleet, its equipment, and so that really affected the civilian sector. And a lot of pilots were forced to leave the country to find other jobs because there was a reduction in the demand, because there were no flights around, and also we did not have the spare parts. And so the sanctions eventually had a deteriorating effect on the quality of flying during the sanctions era. And this is largely driven by the lack of the ability to actually repair these planes. And so the number of planes right now are reduced. Before there were big numbers of planes, the internal flights, but now it's reduced. And so passengers were even less. And the airlines did not have the capacity to offer enough flights internally, even because of the lack of the repairs and so forth. All these sanctions were heavily experienced by the transportation sector even. And that impacted also the rest of the development across the country. And so airports were stopped to be constructed, and a lot of airplanes were just left and abandoned and became useless because all the contractual agreements right now, they weren't fulfilled by foreign companies due to the sanctions. And this added to the unemployment in Libya and increased people's dissatisfaction with the regime. And the sanctions also reflected on the quotidian experiences of the Libyan citizens. Across all different sectors of human experience, they were damaged by these sanctions. As I've noted earlier, that Libya is massive and the distance between cities is huge. And so right now, people are forced to transfer by road, and that increased the number of accidents, in car accidents, and that's because there are no flights anymore, and lack of flights between cities. And spare parts didn't exist. And so all of these conglomerations of conjunctures, they led to this a doubly effect of human suffering. And the Ministry of Health said that this has led to more than 8,500 unjustified deaths. And these include deaths that for cases that cannot be transported elsewhere, including ones who were traveling inside Libya and had car accidents because they were traveling to another place to get access to healthcare. And adding another layer to that is that because of the lack of transportation, Libya was not able to import vaccinations and other medical equipment that needed to be delivered in a timely manner. Sanctions really delayed the delivery of vaccines, the transportation of injured people, the provision of first aid, planes to travel elsewhere. All of these were impacted, and this eventually was felt by the normal, ordinary Libyan. And so what Libyans eventually were trying to do most of the time is to try to travel by car to a neighboring country and then try to fly to another country, Germany or somewhere in Europe, to get healthcare. And so that if there's an urgent case, a lot of people die on the road. And these very people obviously experienced, found it difficult to find funding to actually get healthcare elsewhere, but also visa issues because of the sanctions. And because of the sanctions that happened, we had luckily no airplane accidents. But back in 1992, at the very end of 1992, because of the lack of the repairs and the accuracy of a newly updated equipment of the aviation radars, there was a civilian airplane flying from eastern Libya to western Libya, and that plane crashed because of the lack of coordination and the lack of having well repaired equipment. And so now to the military sector, there were roughly 400 military airplanes, and that had an air defense system that was quite advanced at the time, looking at how young the country is, but also how big the land is. the training for those pilots was often done at the Soviet Union, and both in and then also in West Germany and also in France. But at the same time, during the sanctions, the training of pilots that was hampered and stopped because of the sanctions. And the sanctions eventually reduced the ability for the military defense to actually protect Libya. And as we know, back in the Gulf of Sirte, which is in the center of Libya, and Libya and the US confronted each other. And as we know that in 1973, Libya declared that the coordination point 32.5 belongs to Libya. And so the United States did not like that decision that Libya is trying to claim its own waters. And so Ronald Reagan started to do bullying, maneuvering activities in the Gulf of Sirte, which trespassed Libyan waters without authorization. And that intensified the relations between the US and Libya. And so the air defense, because of the sanctions, was weakened over time. And also because of lack of staff and military personnel to get the proper training, was impacted by sanctions, and we did not have enough trained pilots for many of the airplanes, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Despite the fact that Libya had a number of military airplanes, but we didn't have enough pilots. For example, in the 70s, we imported these MiG airplanes, but then because of the sanctions, we were not able to fly them to anywhere. Also, when we had some French fleet, we could not fly them anywhere either for repairs. And for example, for French companies, when we had 32 at the beginning of the sanctions, because of the lack of repairs, they ended up in just a matter of 8 years, only 8 were functional. And due to these sanctions, the military, particularly the Air Force, was not able to renew itself, and so its ability to defend itself against the other aggressive countries was hampered and stagnating. And even in 2011, when people said, how come the country is not defending itself against NATO? Because of those sanctions had a lingering effect in 2011 that the country was incapable of defending itself. During the whole sanctions era, Libya has lost, according to the IMF and the World Bank, more than $33 billion. And these sanctions affected the agriculture sector, the transportation, education, healthcare, industry, and then the exchange rate. $1 is right now is 4 Libyan dinars at least, and so the basic Libyan civilians, the value of their money now weighs less, and this is on the economic aspect. But despite all of this, Libyans still at the time still struggled and survived through this sanctions regime. Libyans did not bow down to this regime of imperialism and sanctions. And so, as I have shown earlier, the sanctions on the air sector, it's considered to be the main pathway to any form of development in terms of transportation in any way, anywhere across the world. Libya, before 2011, used to have this capabilities to engage outside of this imperialist orbit because it had a cadre of leadership that was capable of offsetting imperialist influences on the country. But now because of the bringing back of sanctions, we don't have the cadre of those who can fly the airplanes, who can actually engage with combat in any foreign threats in Libya after 2011. And so despite that, the fact that Libyan pilots before they used to protect the seas, the land, and the air, and then also we had an advanced airplanes before that only existed in Ukraine and Libya and the United States before the war that's ongoing right now. But then to conclude, right now Libya struggled, and Libya is struggling still now, and these sanctions really impact all spheres of life. And I just want to thank you, everybody who is a Libyan who's struggling for self-reliance, for sovereignty, for sustainability of the Libyan territory, for the Libyan resources, who are trying to defend the land against this imperialism. And I hope that Libyans continue to fight against these imperialist aggressions through a collective global forces against US imperialism. And thank you once again for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Hamza, and thank you so much for Ali and Assam for translating. Our final speaker is Dr. Murad El-Sadawi. Dr. El-Sadawi is currently on fellowship at the University of Rochester Medical Center in Rochester, New York, here in the United States. He's specializing in hematopathology. Before that, he finished his residency at Boston Medical Center in Boston. And he also graduated from Al Arab Medical University in Benghazi, in Libya. Thank you for joining us, Dr. El-Sadawi. The floor is yours, and you have also 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. I want to thank you all to give me this opportunity. And I really enjoyed what the speaker mentioned before me. I think they cover all aspects. But I want to thank also my friend, Mr. Wael Idris. Wael Idris, he worked very hard to prepare this material, and he did probably more than 90% of this information provided to me. And I want to give it in a presentation, and I hope you will join it. You will enjoy it. And sorry, this is my first time to present. I hope you see a full screen. Can you confirm, please?
Yes, yes, Murad, yes.
Full screen, right? Not double screen. Okay. Okay. Matthew, full screen, right?
Yes, full screen, yes, absolutely,
sure.
Yes.
So to speak about what happened on 17 February and what followed of NATO's Intervention and Security Council 1973 decision, we have to return to the years prior to the intervention when the sanctions were initially lifted. In Libya, the war was an example of an exceptional case in which the Western powers met against Libya with a great global and international silence and wide support and justification with the Western left, with the logic that is impossible for this to be an imperialist intervention by virtue of the fact that Western oil companies actually existed in Libya. And this was a very superficial description that doesn't provide any reading of serious facts that precede the war. Libya was under US sanction for a very long time. Beginning in the early 80s, then these sanctions developed in the mid-90s during the Bill Clinton era, what is known as the Libya and Iran law. In the year 1992, Libya was accused of the Lockerbie bombing case. I will not elaborate on the case and how Libya was accused. The sanctions cost Libya 25 billion at that time. When oil prices were suffering from a period of stagnation, Libya refused to hand over the accused except to a third neutral country, and these sanctions continued while Gaddafi was reviewing the lax official Arab position. Regarding the issue of sanction against Libya, which was punished as a result of its position on standing with the Arab and international issues. When Africa countries stood with Libya and broke through the air blockade, it had the greatest impact on acceptance of the United States and Britain. The mediation of Nelson Mandela, this African position exchanged the Arab position. In addition to its effective influence, pushed Gaddafi to seek Africa unity, as he put it. It appeared to him that Africa are Libya's true friends. Africa was no stranger to Libya or Gaddafi. Libya number 32 rule in supporting African liberation movements, training them on arms and opposing a betrayed regime speaks for itself. But what has emerged, here is the issue of Africa unity, which Gaddafi viewed as an economic lever capable of establishing economic transformation from rent to industrialization, and then the occurrence of social transformation and exit from the tribal situation. This began with the visiting Niger and Nigeria in 1997. Then the establishment of the Caucasus of Sahel and Sahara state, which was the vanguard on the formation of African Union. In February 1998 in Tripoli with 5 members. In addition to Libya, the countries of Mali, Chad, Niger, Sudan, and Burkina Faso, until it reached by 2005 to include 23 members, 23 member states. And also in 2000, the Caucasus of has economic community and obtained observer status in the United Nations General Assembly, which is more than half of the membership of African Union. In 1999, Libya financed and launched the Bank of Sahel and Sahara for Investment and Trade, BSIC, with 250 million euros to support regional development initiatives, and also establish a fund to assist and support women, children, and youth. Gaddafi asserted that the CSM was behind the establishment of African Union. It is Harry Keiko Bey's cornerstone and driving force. On September 9th, 1999, the decision to establish the African Union was ratified at the Libya Sirte summit. You've been reviewing the Sirte declaration later. The US embassy in Libya noted that the information of the African Union was seen by the regime, as it could eventually lead to Gaddafi's leader of United Africa. Gaddafi hastily rushed toward Pan-Africanism, wearing the mantle of Kuma Nkrumah, as he sought to get the African Union to endorse the creation of single African army and greater power leverage for intervention by Africans to maintain peace within African countries. Gaddafi achieved the first success here when African Union leaders agreed to create a ready-made Africa force by 2010 at the 5th Summit of African Union held in Libya in July 2005. Gaddafi called for the establishment of a system that would be reasonable of the defense of the entire continent, and also called a single defense minister to implement the common security of the African Union and a common defense pact. Gaddafi criticized the previous OAU for achieving a little in its nearly 40 years of existence, and cited Nkrumah's speech at the funding of OAU in 1963, stating that Nkrumah predicted that artificial borders would create conflicts. He also criticized those who think the United States of Africa is being rushed, saying we have been moving incrementally for 100 years. A review of US embassy documents in Tripoli published in WikiLeaks found alarming evidence along the line with what US Ambassador Jean Kritz repeatedly described as a Libyan dinar diplomacy and the strength of its portfolio. Through the LAP, Libya Africa portfolio, and through the Libyan Arab African Investment Company, it's called LAICO, which is affiliated with the Libyan Investment Authority, and through the TAM Oil company with the brand Oil Libya. The latter alone owns 1,260 stations, operates in many airports in 19 African countries. Bashir Saleh, head of Libyan African portfolio, spoke at the length about the agriculture and communications. He explained that one of the lab mandates was to focus on adding value of Africa's exports, the prolonged absence of which has been a serious drain on capital from which Western countries have benefited since colonization of Africa. Speaking of Libya, had noted, Libya is a major producer of, Liberia, sorry. Liberia is a major producer of rubber, but there are no factories that produce rubber products in Liberia. Are there factories to add a value to raw material in Liberia? There are none. There is not even a small factory that produce balls or rubber toys to kids or to Liberian kids. For Liberian children, all the material that Liberian produce are a raw material for export. Giving similar example, citing the cacao, Kenya, and the coffee in Kenya. This explains the practical direction of these projects, which were even seeking to invest in water projects. The cultivation of grains of wheat and rice, and the endeavor to restore life to Lake Chad, to the extent of Gaddafi pledged to finance a project to transfer water from Lake of Congo to Lake of Chad if it was environmentally and technically feasible. At the African Summit in Sirte in July 1999, a decision was adopted to establish an African Court of Justice that would make entities such as International Criminal Court less important than they are currently. Obama Secretary of State Hillary Clinton seemed more interested in the recent development, especially when Africa leaders decided not to cooperate with the International Criminal Court. In an urgent telegram, Clinton asked all US diplomat posts to inform her of how the African Union came to this decision, how many countries have representatives present at the summit, and whether only Gaddafi introduced the resolution highlighting his role in his sponsor. She further asked if there were any objections, who opposed it, what were the chances of ratification of the decision, and whether it needed any ratification. Given the high-profile rule Hasley granted to the ICC during the foreign intervention in Libya in 2011. At the urging of Hillary Clinton and others, who indictments were one-sided and focused only on Gaddafi and his closest officials. It is significant and not merely coincident that Clinton was very concerned about African Union position on the ICC at this summit in 2009. And it also shows the kind of friction and existed between the United States and Libya over the rule of Pan-Africanism. Later in 2011, when the Security Council adopted the decision to wage war against Libya, it authorized the freezing of assets of the Libyan Investment Corporation and Africa portfolio. This freeze continued for 6 months after the NATO bombing campaign on Libya stopped. More than 30 billion belonging to Central Bank of Libya were frozen by the US administration. The Libyan differences with the United States were not limited to ambitious African projects only, but also African planned to establish a headquarters in the Africa country as a planet, and to work with the African countries regarding the interpretation of peace, combating terrorism and democracy, and interfering against genocide war were also on the table. Through the community of Sahel-Sahara state, Libya objected to the plan for the US military presence in Africa. As it issued on the November 21st, 2007, the community of Sahel-Sahara countries, a statement from its headquarters in Tripoli, categorically rejects Africa and any foreign military presence in any member state of the community of Sahel-Sahara states. Stephen Mopson, in his article on the resource nationalization in the Washington Post, dated June 10, 2011, reports that Gaddafi called ConocoPhillips CAO Jim Mulva for a half an hour in late February 2008. According to Foreign State Department messages in WikiLeaks, Gaddafi threatened him to either cut Libyan production or expulsion of all US oil and gas companies. In 2008, Libya oil minister Shukri Ghanem interviewed a senior ExxonMobil official that Libya had drastically cut back its production to punish the United States. Other messages also talked about abort steps in the nationalization of the resource, and Gaddafi urged in his speech that Libyans seized all of that benefits from this money. In November 2008, Gaddafi made his first visit to Moscow since Soviet times. Reportedly, discussions with Putin and President Dmitry Medvedev include visions of creating a gas cartel that would include Russia, Libya, Iran, Algeria, and some Central Asian countries. In the same context, when Gaddafi visited Chavez in Venezuela in September 2009 and hosted Argentinian President Cristina Fernandez in November 2008, they decided to make the establishment and how to form SATO. SATO is a South Atlantic Territory Organization on the agenda of the next Latin African Summit. With the start of events of February 17th of 2011 in Libya, they took a different path from what happened in Tunisia and Egypt, where the demonstrations were quickly militarized in the eastern region. The police stations and security headquarters were attacked, which prompted the security forces to respond, especially in the city of Benghazi, which resulted a propaganda campaign that was unheard of in the Arab media. lies were published about very exaggerated numbers of death and about prisons of African mercenaries who were killing Libyans who were brought by Algerian planes, as well as about cases of rape of women and about bombing of demonstration by planes. And in order to avoid by the former state more congestion and blind violence, it was forced while it was in very strong position to withdraw from all camps in the eastern region by Friday, February 2011. British Foreign Secretary William Hague put his own spices on the propaganda to make it more explosive and make more chaos, even in the Western region. He came out with a statement that the same night saying that Gaddafi was in his way to Venezuela. And this was a point of no return for many people. When the rebels become armed in the eastern Libya, they started attacking the westward toward the Tribunal. However, when the rebel forces were pursued to Benghazi and quickly lost battle, appeals began to mount for Western countries to intervene, to impose no-fly zone, and to protect them from what was claimed to be a war of inheritance. Sorry. To dismantle this narrative, we start by explaining the R2P doctrine of the responsibility to protect. There is no legal clause within the Charter of United Nations that allows intervention in other countries under the clause of protection. For example, in general, 2009, Special Advisor to Secretary General Edward Locke claimed that that the responsibility to protect was a political concept, not a legal one. On February 21st, 2011, a few days after the start of the street protest, the Libya deputy, the permanent representative to the United Nations, Ibrahim Dabashi, stated very quickly, we expect a real genocide in Tripoli. Airplanes still bring mercenaries to airport. In this statement, there are three reasons associated with the decision to ban flights: the use of the airport, the recruitment of mercenaries, and the war of genocide. A Pentagon press conference, when asked, do you see any evidence that Gaddafi actually fired on his own from the air, but do you have independent confirmation? Supporting him was Admiral Mullen. That's right. We haven't seen any confirmation at all.
Sorry to interrupt you, Murad. You have 2 minutes left. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure, almost done. Thanks for allowing.
Thank you.
After the defecation of Abdurrahman Shalgam, the Libyan representative to the United Nations and the Libyan mission, Libya requested a visa of Ali Atriki to occupy his position, but the United States illegally used the presence of United Nations headquarters in its country and refused to grant him a visa. I will pass this. The violation of 1973 resolution didn't stop, but NATO forces began bombing the Libya forces wherever they were and giving air cover to the rebel forces to advance toward the capital and Sirte. And through that, they helped kill civilians, especially in Libyan cities like Tawarga, which is inhabited by Black Libyans, and by displacing them from their city, as well as displacing residents of city of the name of the city is called what's that? I forget her name. In the Western Mountain in Libya, they also evacuated and be kicked out from their city. All this happened through the assistance of NATO forces in violation of principle of and 7 in Article 2, the character of United Nations. Although international sanctions don't prevent full embargo from Libya, but at the same time, they implicitly do so through sanction on our institutions, such as National Oil Corporation and its subsidiaries. So Libya first tried to import fuel shipments through Libya shipping ships, which don't have sanctions. However, this made it become impossible with the time when NATO forces began to completely prevent the delivery of oil to Libya, which made the lives of citizens difficult and harsh, and lacked electricity and car fuels, which people began to buy at high prices from fuel smuggled from Tunisia and Algeria. NATO also targeted a pipeline factory for the Great Man-Made River south of Brega, killing 6 civilians. An official in the river authority in post-regime governments confirmed the impact of that bombing. On June 22, 2011, NATO forces bombed a residential complex for a family and relatives of members of the Libyan Revolutionary Command Council, Kouaildi al-Hamidi. The bombing killed his daughter-in-law and his 2 children, his sister and his nephew also as well. And the number of relatives and neighbors was killed as well. So numbering, like in total, 13 people was killed in that attack. In the village called Major, south of Zlitin, another bombing took place on the night of August 8, killing 34 people. The attack occurred 3 times. First time is targeted a residential house for the family of Ali Hamid, killing all the 5 women and 7 children in it. And the second bombing targeted the house of El-Jarud, killing his wife, mother, sister, and his 9-month-old infant daughter, as she was a military target for NATO forces because the child threatened her life. Civilians, according to 1973 resolution. As for the third attack, it expressed a barbarity of the NATO forces as they waited for people to gather in the second house that was bombed to search for victims and help them to extract them. So the paramedics were bombed with a missile, killing 18 other victims. These are the places the major bombs happened. This is a city of Sirte also. In Sirte, the NATO also attacked multiple civilians and killed them. This is another, these are the areas that were mainly the genocide of NATO that happened. This is also a home for Omar al-Hamdi. He lost his son. His son is 15-month-old. And this is another house in Zlitin, in city of Zlitin, how his 2 of his children was killed. His name was Azan Muhammad. And this is another family was. Okay, I'm done. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for your excellent testimony, Dr. Al-Sadawi. Really appreciate it. Before we turn it over to for Q&A with the jurors, we do have one more person who is joining us to talk about his experience in Sirte. He was on the ground. This person is Salah Khalifa. He was a Boy Scout team leader in Sirte. Like I said, who was on the ground there during the NATO bombing campaign. He's currently working in the humanitarian field as a national officer with the International Organization for Migration. So Salah, if you can take about 5 minutes to talk about, offer your comments about what's happened. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, and I will speak in Arabic just to be comfortable and to make sure my words will be described as I mean.
Hello, my name is Salah. I am from Sirte, and I was in Sirte, the very city that was surrounded by the rebels from the 15th of September 2011 until the 23rd of October. There was no security whatsoever for anybody who's living inside the city. So my neighbor died because of kidney failure because they could not take him to the nearest hospital outside of the area. And NATO bombing, starting from 15th of September to the 2nd of October, was very random bombardment of civilian areas. And they were bombing from the sea, and also they're bombing from the air, and then the city is surrounded from east, west, and south. The city was not targeting military personnel. It was anybody. And of course, if you throw any bomb in any city, I know at least 15, 20 people because of they died because of these bombings were by the rebels and by NATO. And so after 2011, we did not see anybody from the Libyan state from a law perspective, and so the National Transitional Council did not care about Sirte itself. And they had this law that I don't remember its name exactly. And so it exempted and exonerated all the rebels from any crimes that they have conducted. So a complete impunity for the rebels. And they passed that law just to kind of make sure that the rebels don't get prosecuted for the crimes of humanity that they conducted. And so there's a district in Sirte called District 2, and there were a bunch of civilians who were a bunch of paramedics who were helping the other civilians who were bombed by the rebels, and NATO came and bombed the paramedics themselves. And there was another city, another school next to us, was completely annihilated, destroyed, flattened to the ground. And my own house was damaged. And to be honest, that sanction and embargo on 2011 was inhumane, and the bombing was, I don't know how, I don't have the words to explain it. I don't know who's responsible for this. Is this the international community? And we don't see anybody talking about it for the past 10 years. But there has been many catastrophes that happened during the time when Sirte was under that embargo. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, Salah, for that testimony. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Jeremy Miller, who's also a special rapporteur on Africa like myself, and he's going to facilitate the discussion moving forward. Jeremy, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Navid, and thank you very much to all of the presenters so far in this hearing. It's been very, very powerful and informative. As Navid said, we have now reached the question and answer part of this hearing, and so we are going to first, the way we're going to do this is we're going to first take questions from our jurists, and then following that, time permitting, we will attempt to field questions from other people who have tuned in to the hearing. And to our jurists, I would like to ask that please attempt to limit your statements to approximately 4 minutes so that we can get through everything fluidly. And I'd like to ask that perhaps if you have any kind, or offer if you have any kind of opening statement regarding the course of measures against Libya, his sanctions, to please open with this. So without further ado, I will go ahead and call on our first jurist, and I will start with Mohammed Tay, who is the chair of the Ghana Observatory of Human Rights, a professor of constitutional law, labor law, and private administrative law at Lebanese University, and a former member of the Lebanese University Council and Association of Instructors at the Lebanese University, as well as a member of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Mr. Tay, welcome.
And so to bring attention to what has been happening, I think one of the most important things that we need to strive for is finding exact documented evidence of the crimes that were conducted and of the sanctions to bring this case even further in the future, a case against US imperialism and sanctions.
Thank you, Dr. Tay. And I see a hand from Dr. Al-Sadawi. Is this in response?
Yes, actually, all information that already represented, all of them with the document, like with the official sources. It's not like just like from our mind or something. There is everything is with the. I can share my screen to everybody, and all these with the like official documents, official like either journalists put an articles with many proven facts.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Sadawi. I also see a hand from Mustafa Fitori. So, do you have a response?
Yeah, I just, to our colleague, Dr. Mohammed Tay, I just want to point out, is probably the timing and the time itself allowed for the, witnesses like us or presenters, if you like, did not, was not enough to reference everything we have said. At least for my part, everything I have said is well documented, and I can direct anybody who's interested to follow up in these points I raised, especially the civilian victims of the NATO bombardment in 2011. I can, with pleasure, help everybody and send them the relevant material that backs up everything I have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitori. Moving right along, I would like to introduce.
All of this evidence should be provided to the court as an actual evidence. All of this tribunal should be used as an evidence to a specific court to document as a document of the sanctions and the crimes conducted by imperialism and NATO.
Thank you, Dr. Tay. And Dr. Al-Sadawi?
Just a very quick response to Mr. Muhammad. I will try to say it in Arabic and English at the same time. I will not exceed more than 1 minute. So, like NATO crimes and genocide and massacres, it's hard to sue them with the documents. There is a family of Khalid al-Hamidi. His family all his family is gone. There is a family in Benuli, the name of Al-Jafara. One of the sons just still alive. The other family is all died, and they tried hard to try to sue them, and no way. It's no way. It's like very resistible to these people do crimes and go away. And also, if you don't mind, just 1 minute, I will share just from a doctor I know in Sirte. She was in the medical school. She's not even a doctor. She's volunteered. This is in September 23. This is in a Friday. This is just a sample representative of what NATO did. You see, all the face is gone. She's died. They are kids. I'm sorry for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sadawi, for sharing this with us. I have a hand from Mustafa Fitori, from Mr. Mustafa Fitori, but as well, I want to turn first to one of the chairs of this tribunal process from the steering committee, Nina Farnia. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jeremy. I just have a quick comment, and then I'll pass it back to you so that Victor Good and Prabhat Patnaik can speak. In terms of what Dr. Tay said, one of the objectives of this tribunal is precisely what you suggested, which is to generate evidence from the 16 countries that we are covering. We actually just added Hawaii, and we've been asked to add Puerto Rico as well, to try the United States and its partners, both in international tribunals and also in US courts. And several of the jurors are very, very successful litigators who have tried great cases both in the US and in international courts. So that is exactly what we're doing. We're compiling the evidence and we're pursuing litigation. That process will begin after the tribunals is complete in the summer. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Nina. And Mr. Fitori, you had another response.
Just very quickly, I want to point everybody to the reports, of the independent rights groups, international rights groups like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and a couple of others, including fact-finding mission, which was operating inside Libya in the ground in Tripoli in 2011, and collected so many evidence. And I also want to mention very important note here that Khalid Khoueldi Ahmedi, whose entire family was wiped out by NATO bombardment in June 2011. Mr. Sardawi, my brother and friend Murad Sardawi, referred to in the city of Sarman, west of Tripoli, actually took NATO to court in Brussels about 4 years ago, and he could not get anywhere. They have a lawyer, they have the complete legal setup, if you like, but they could not progress the case because of the fact that the Belgian court told them that NATO, as an organization, has a diplomatic immunity in Brussels, so it cannot be sued or prosecuted for that matter. So they tempted the lawyer who's based in Brussels. I can link anybody with him. He attempted also to take the case to the European Human Rights Court in Brussels also, but so far he has not been successful. I don't know the reason why he's not successful so far. And I have to mention very important note here that the case in Brussels was twofold. One, about the civilian victims in Libya, the figure of which has never been precise, but I mentioned some kind of a sample early on out of my work with air wars and the matter. And the other side of the case, or the second fold, is the use of the depleted uranium and bombardment over certain locations, I would say, certain targets, especially in Tripoli. And the effects of the depleted uranium. We have seen the experience of Iraq before, and in former Yugoslavia as well, and especially for Kosovo. And I don't need to go into details, but again, I would stress the fact that I'm prepared to share everything I have with anybody who's interested, including, of course, the chairs of the tribunals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitori. I see hands up from Victor Good and Prabhat Patnaik. I do want to say I am going, these are both jurists. I do want to say I am going to introduce both of you, and I was going to go to Mr. Good next, but you have direct responses to this particular set of questions. If so, now would be a good time. I'll turn it over right now to Victor Good. I believe you're muted, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. I have a short question. Since Libya has been under various sanctions for almost over 30 years now, have any of the sanctions been lifted? That's the first part of my question. And have any of the seized or frozen assets of Libya been recovered?
I can answer that if you like.
Go ahead, Mr. Fitori.
Yes, okay. Well, that's a very good question. The sanctions that have been, related to certain particular events like the Lockerbie disaster, for example, have been lifted. And the sanctions that are related to generally, under the pretext of supporting terrorism, have also been lifted. And the political, getting together, reconciliation, if you like, between the late Gaddafi regime and the West, starting the broachment, if you like, starting in '99, also led to the kind of welcoming Libya again to the so-called international fold. But then there is the other set of sanctions which were adopted by the Security Council in 2011 under the pretext of protecting Libyan civilians. Some of them are still in place. Like, for example, it's somehow not directly related, but it's still related to the sanctions. Flying out of Libya, for example, still today, to Europe is banned. You cannot fly from here to Rome or Tripoli, for example, to any other destination in Europe. Some of it has to do with sanctions. Some of it has to do with preferences of certain countries and airlines, foreign airlines, who believe that security situation is not very good in Libya, and it's not safe for their airplanes to operate in the country. And other sanctions that are related, adopted in 2011, which are financial sanctions that froze much of Libya's foreign assets in foreign countries, like in the United States and other countries, have not been lifted, despite the fact that the regime has ended and Gaddafi himself was murdered. And now we have, we are supposedly under, democratic government that was brought in by the West and supported by the West. But the money is still frozen over there. And for this part, for this particular part, I would say it's good that the money is still frozen and nobody can touch it, especially the successive over-corrupt our governments here. I would prefer to see the money still frozen over there, because unfortunately, we just have the pandemic of corruption that's going on from 2011, still in progress, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitori. So I just a little bit of housekeeping. Those couple questions came from Victor Good, who has practiced civil rights law for decades, and while serving as director for the National Conference of Black Lawyers, founded the Affirmative Action Coordinating Center along with the Center for Constitutional Rights and the National Lawyers Guild, and also in 1983 was one of the founding members of the City University of New York School of Law. Next up, we have a question from Professor Prabhat Patnaik, who is Professor Emeritus at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and who is an author of multiple books. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the extremely valuable testimony which I have had the privilege of hearing. One of the questions which I wanted to ask has already, I think, been answered by Mustafa Fitori, namely, even after 2011, the sanctions in the form of freezing of the assets of Libya have not been lifted. In other words, the assets remain frozen. Now, one of the consequences of the freezing of the assets is, of course, the depreciation of the currency. You cannot use your own assets. Exports decline because of the sanctions, and the depreciation of the currency gives rise to inflation, which actually hurts the people. Quite apart from the bombing and the obvious ways in which the people are terrorized and killed, there is the terrorizing and killing through the economic mechanism of depreciation of the currency, rise in inflation, squeeze on the living standards of the people, quite apart from the medical sanctions and so on. Now, what I want to know is that after 2011, has there been a depreciation of the Libyan currency and an inflation rate that continues as before, or has it come down? What exactly has happened in the more recent period?
Thank you, sir, for this question. I want to turn now to Mr. Matteo Capasso for an initial response.
Yes, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit more of details on the asset freeze that has been taking place, because what we're talking about is basically the two main sovereign wealth funds, which were used, in fact, by the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya to develop its project of African unity. One of them is the Libyan Investment Authority, the other one is the Libyan African Investment Portfolio. What it's important to understand is that this is why sanctions are connected to the bombing of NATO and the destruction of Libya and its government and sovereignty, is because after the freezing of those assets, Libya had money invested in multiple countries. For example, there are documents and there are testimonies revealing that the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, has been channeling those frozen assets to a major figure in the country, Khalifa Haftar, hoping to boost its military victory on the ground. Belgium instead has allowed the interest accumulated on these frozen assets out of the country to unknown beneficiaries. The Libyan government has tried to bring Belgium to court, but so far they haven't been able to reach an agreement. It is also important to see how the revisionism of history and the fall of the previous government has allowed, for example, Israeli families to sue the Libyan government, asking for money from these funds for the victims of the Munich attack in 1972, claiming that Gaddafi and the regime were supporting the Palestinians. The same thing has happened with a group of Irish Protestant families, victims of the IRA, claiming that on the basis of the fact that the Libyan government was supporting the IRA. And the last thing that I wanted to say is connected to Professor Patnaik's question, is the fact that NATO has delegitimized the financial institution of the country. There is a major problem with the fact that Libyans cannot access foreign currency, and this has created a huge, has not only created two financial institutions that work at the same time, but it also created major cases of corruption around the assignment of letter of credits, which have actually become a tool of power in the country, precisely for the reasons that he was explaining earlier. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Capasso. I would like to turn now to a response from Mr. Fitori.
Yeah, sure. I just want to try to answer the question from Professor Batnick. Of course, the Libyan dinar lost too much of its value over the last 10 years or so. The exchange rate has gone up, and you now have to have something like 5.5 Libyan dinars for the $1, when it was 3 point something back in 2011, and that has to do with the freezing of assets. And the freezing of assets, inflation has gone up. The current rate, I believe, I was reading something yesterday, I think it's around 4% or something, and expected to continue that way until the end of 2023. I have to go back to the freezing of assets, and I must mention something very important, that some countries, they just were selective in applying the UN-related resolutions freezing Libyan assets in the way that they use them to their likes. If they want to support certain groups inside Libya, so they find a way to do that. And they did this, at least from my knowledge and my readings, they did this in 2011, 2012, 2013 in the following country: the Netherlands, Belgium, and to a certain degree, the UK, whereby unfroze some money because they wanted to help this side or that side inside Libya. Of course, after the regime, the former Gaddafi regime was slaughtered and finished. So even the idea of universal freezing of assets abroad is not applied across the board. So it's applied selectively, I would say. And the point Professor Batnick raised is very important. Probably the normal to the ordinary citizens inside Libya, freezing of the assets doesn't make a lot of sense. He doesn't understand what impact does it have in his daily life. Well, it has a very serious impact, and that is affecting the inflation, the exchange rate of the hard currency, Libyan dinar versus hard currency, as well as the driving prices up, because most of the stuff here in Libya is imported and paid for by hard currency, and because of the exchange rate, it becomes more and more expensive. The last time I was in Libya, before this time, I was here in October, and then I left to my family in France, and then I came back about 2 weeks ago, and I noticed immediately prices of certain commodities, daily commodities like flour, like cooking oil, and other things. Even the vegetables, which are locally produced, have increased by at least 20%. And of course, some of it has to do with the currency fluctuation and the depreciation of the Libyan dinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitori. Professor Patnaik, did you have any follow-up questions, sir? You are muted, sir.
No, not at the moment. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the answers.
Thank you very much. Very grateful for the question. Next up, I would like to welcome Mireille Fanon Mendes France, who is the founder and co-chair of the Frantz Fanon Foundation and a professor at Paris Descartes University. She served as former expert chair of the United Nations Working Group on People of African Descent, and is also the daughter of world-renowned revolutionary psychiatrist and political author Frantz Fanon. Welcome, Mireille. Okay,
sorry,
we may have lost.
Yeah, I think we lost her.
Oh, yes, but okay.
There you
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Oh, sorry. I have
Mary,
some
the
difficulty
floor
to
is yours.
find where I have to answer. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. No, I have no specific question. Thank you. It was really well informed. And maybe I have some question about the role of France, because as you know, I am from France. And the role of France, because I have seen also France took sanction on Libya. And do the expert have some information about that? The specific sanction, except money, of course, I have seen that, but is there other sanction taken by France?
Would anyone
Because
like
I ask
to,
that, I ask that because as you may know, France is a very close friend from US. And it is, for me, US sanction could not exclude France sanction, because it is they are exactly on the same page.
as some
As a colonial.
I did not hear the question, Jeremy. If you can repeat it, please. Thank you.
I believe the question is the specific role of France as a close United States ally vis-a-vis the sanctions on Libya. Is this Mireille? Is this a fairly good paraphrasing of the question?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. And Essam, I actually didn't catch it, but you had your hand raised. Would you like to take a crack at answering this question, and also whatever other commentary that you had previously?
Okay, so I'll start with a commentary, but then I will translate Marielle's question to Hamza for Hamza to speak, because I think France played a big role with sanctions and aviation. But first, I would like to add something that was missing from the statement that Murad said, related to the double standards of the international court and so forth. So in 2011, Libya, when it was appealing the accusations against violations of human rights that were imposed by the United Nations, the head of the Libyan Association for Human Rights, whose name is Slimane Bouchouagir, who eventually became Libya's National Transitional Council after 2011 in Switzerland, and the head of the United Nations Watch organization, which is a right-wing organization, signed a deal with 70 other non-governmental organizations, and then on 25th of February, he went to and this is me translating at the same time, he went to the United Nations and said that in Libya, there, in those just 7 days of protests, 6,000 individuals have been killed by the regime, 3,000 in Tripoli alone. And then when a French journalist asked him by the name of Julian Tell, in a documentary called A Humanitarian War, he asked Slimane Bouchouagir from where did he get that number. And so Slimane Bouchouagir replied and said that he got it from the head of the National Transitional Council, Mahmoud Jibril, who gave him those numbers, meaning that the United Nations Security Council and and also the Human Rights Watch, they made the decision that of the numbers of civilians being killed based on an account of a party in the conflict, as opposed to an independent investigation that came from either a third party of the two parties that are fighting. And so there was a lot of fabrications of that, really what Noam Chomsky essentially calls manufacturing of consent, that, oh my God, the regime is actually killing these people because there were all these foreign actors playing in this way. Now, I will translate Marielle's question to in Arabic, and then I'll pass the floor to Hamza, and then I'll switch my role to a translator to translate his response, inshallah, to English. أستاذ حمزة، لو أنت ما زال موجود على الخط معنا، في سؤال كان موجه تأثير العقوبات الفرنسية والأمريكية. احنا تكلمنا عن الأمريكية بصفة عامة، لكن نبيك تركز على الفرنسية. كيف أثرت في قطاع الطيران الجوي بصفة عامة والطيران المدني والعسكري؟ So the sanctions during the French sanctions, the Libyan Aviation Authority was established in 1955, and then 1963 is when it started. And then we did not have enough. We did not have enough pilots, and we did not have enough pilots or enough planes even to operate the planes that we had. And so we made a deal to work with the French for 10 years to buy the planes and also get pilots. So the pilots are Italian, are French. And so France kind of operated a lot of our airplanes. And so this continued until 1975, this continued. And in 1975, Libya got rid of French companies, and so Libya nationalized the companies, and so Libya monopolized its own planes. And so even the airplanes, they changed the airlines, they changed their names from the Monarchy Airlines to the Libyan Arab Airlines. And so from 1975, France has been angered by this act of nationalizing the Libyan fleets, especially that the initial plan was to have a very long contract. And so the planes that we even had with the Mirage airplanes, and so many other French airplanes, especially for the military fleet, we stopped contracting with them, and we started contracting also the Americans. And so when the 80s came, skirmishes started to happen between France and Libya, because France was operating in Chad. And so France prevented the Libyan Mirage planes, and there were roughly 100 Mirage airplanes existed in Libya. And this was one of the reasons that the reason was that because Libya decided to start buying airplanes from the Soviet Union. And so the sanctions that were imposed by France on Libya was because of Libya's decision to turn to the Soviet Union and start buying Russian equipment. And so, one of the reasons that also sanctions that existed on Libya from 1992 is because of obviously the Lockerbie accusations, but also the UT airplane that was downed in Libya. And so France also partook in the excruciating sanctions, and France has its own imperialist greed in Libya, and we have all been affected negatively by it. And so there was a direct confrontation between Libya and France, but on the ground in terms of Chad. But then the one who actually just suffered is not the military personnel, not the leadership were impacted either in France or Libya. It was the Libyan civilians who were impacted. And so there was everything stopped because of all these sanctions. And I hope that I answered very succinctly to what role did France have in the sanctions on Libya and its people during this whole era. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Toumi, and as well as Mr. Kogli. So moving along here, let me just see here. Moving along here, I would like to ask if our last jurist for this hearing, Suzanne Adli, has any questions. Suzanne is a labor organizer, lawyer, longtime Arab community organizer, president of the National Lawyers Guild, member of the Bureau of International Association of Democratic Lawyers, longtime member of the New York chapter of Al-Ada, the Palestinian Right to Return Coalition, member of CASI, and significantly part of the steering committee, one of the chairs of this international tribunal process. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think that some of the questions I had have been answered quite well. I think that maybe two other questions I wanted to pose as we begin to sort of close out the tribunal is, I think that, we heard really excellent and comprehensive reports today, but that we are going to continue as jurists to look closely at the information and data that's sort of been given to us, as well as like other data. So I'm wondering if the witnesses have any advice as to how other sectors of society have been impacted that we might want to look more closely at. And then also any sort of like comments on how, both the sanctions and also sort of the overall sort of policy of aggression against Libya has impacted also the region of North Africa and the larger continent.
Thank you, Suzanne. And Matteo.
Yes, thanks, Jeremy. Yes, Suzanne, absolutely. I mean, I can say, and I connect your question also to one of the questions that Victor raised before in the chat, which is about the oil sector. He asked earlier about the sanctions impact on it. I personally work on the United Nations archives and the impact of sanctions on Libya. The Libyan Arab Jamahiriya government used to submit a yearly report on the impact of sanctions divided between social, economic, infrastructural, and energy as well. By 1998, for example, 5 million of estimated losses were calculated in relation to the energy sector, mostly related to the fact that it was very difficult to get spare parts. There was a fall off in the efficiency of manufacturing equipment. And then there was also an opportunity for other, for foreign companies to gain in providing these spare parts to the Libyan government through, through deals done in the black market, basically. So, I mean, and then there was the rising cost also of aircraft maintenance, all kinds of things. So, and by 2011, also the government was in a position that needed badly to renovate its oil industry. Now, when it comes instead to the situation and the destruction of Libya, as several other scholars as well, when one of them I think is listening to us, Horace Campbell, has written, is certainly the fact that Libya was trying to project its influence on the African continent in order to create a more independent, project of African unity. This also connects to the question of Mirel, which is the fact that the possibility of creating an economic unity and monetary unity in Africa meant also trying to de-link from the franc, the CFA, and so the monetary dependency from France for many African countries. This also connects to what? To the fact that, you know, in the aftermath of the NATO destruction of Libya, there has been a lot of talking about the African slave trade in the country. Well, I mean, this shouldn't surprise anybody about the fact that, yes, Libya had opened up its borders to many African community, which were immediately targeted also by the so-called rebels in the early days of the NATO destruction, on the basis on the fact that they were considered pro-regimes or mercenaries of the government. It was simply the fact that many of these African communities were supportive of the government because Libya was providing an opportunity for many of them to work inside the country. It is, you know, what happened afterwards is that NATO has destroyed the country, has created the unnecessary instability and lack of security, and so it has also destroyed the labor conditions under which these many African communities were able to work and operate. It comes without saying that those militias and gangs that instead have risen up to power has used those opportunity to sell labor to the same European countries that have destroyed Libya, who are in need of cheap labor in their own plantations, say, for example, in the south of Sicily or in the southern part of Italy. This finally connects to what? To the fact that, yes, the US and France were very much aligned when it came to the destruction of Libya. But if we think about the fact that the US has put 100 billion for the construction of a drone base in Agadez in Niger, this also shows us that NATO is, after the destruction of Libya, has tried its best to, and under the AFRICOM, to expand his own footprint into the whole of Africa. So yes, absolutely, the regional ramifications of the destruction of Libya are present and are still continuing, and they also, you know, they tell us also, and they're very much connected to the counter-terror policies and, you know, accumulation of capital that the US is trying to, you know, to pursue in the African continent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Capasso. So, seeing no further hands at the moment.
Hamza.
Oh, excuse me. There is, Hamza. Mr. Otumi has had it. Go ahead.
شكرا. طبعا إضافة إلى ما قاله الدكتور ماتيو about حول أن في شركات سماسرة كانت تستغل الموقف العقوبات. بنعطيه مثال واقعي جدا جدا لما حدث من سمسرة كما قلت. فعند طبعا في الثمانينات كما عارفين إنها كانت العلاقة بين ليبيا وأمريكا قد انقطعت، وتوقفت جميع سبل الصيانة الدورية وقطع الغيار للطائرات المدنية الليبية التي كانت من نوع بوينغ 727 طبعا الطائرات الليبية في ذلك الوقت، ومع طائرة الفوكر طبعا كما نعلم هذه أسطول ليبيا. طبعا اتجهت الخطوط الليبية أو المصلحة الطيران المدني ليبيا إلى التعامل مع الشركات الأوروبية لكي تقوم بصيانة هذه الطائرات كما تعلمون. طبعا أن الشركات الأوروبية كذلك مربوطة بالاقتصاد طبعا كما نعرف بأمريكا، لذلك حتى الشركات الأوروبية بالظاهر لا تستطيع أن تدعم ليبيا في صيانة الطائرات المذكورة. طبعا فتم طبعا تعاقد لشراء وصيانة الطائرات عن طريق سماسرة. مثلا في سنة طبعا 83 مثلا تم شراء طائرتين من طراز البوينغ 310 طبعا لصالح الخطوط الجوية العربية الليبية، ولكن لم يقم شراءها مباشرة من شركة البوينغ إلى ليبيا، ولكن قامت بشراؤها رقم واحد شركة بريطانية اسمها بريتش كولودينيا. وطبعا الشركة البريطانية طبعا هذه طبعا طبعا ما شرتهاش حتى هي مباشرة، باعتها إلى شركة أخرى لجنوب أفريقيا اسمها سفاري إيرلاين. معناها الشركة الأولى شركة بريطانية، ثم باعتها لشركة من جنوب أفريقيا طبعا، ومنها طبعا بيعها لشركة ثالثة مقرها في دبلن بإيرلندا اسمها ASL Aviation Group Limited طبعا، وهي تابعة لمجموعة بلجيكية كبرى. طبعا نلاحظ هنا مقدار السمسرة على شراء الطائرات حتى وصلت ليبيا، وطبعا هذا وفي الآخر لم تصل مباشرة إلى ليبيا، بل تسليمها إلى دولة عربية في الخليج العربي، ومنها نقلت إلى ليبيا. معناها شوفوا حجم المتاعب التي تلقتها ليبيا. وكذلك في صيانة الطائرات لم يصل أي قطعة غيار مباشرة إلى ليبيا، وكذلك في جميع القطاعات الأخرى، في القطاع النفطي، في القطاع الصحي، في القطاع الزراعي، في القطاع التعليمي. أي مواد مستوردة خارج ليبيا كانت تدور بين دول العالم حتى تصل إلى ليبيا. طبعا ممكن ليبيا طبعا هذه كانت الوسيلة الوحيدة اللي هو ضخ الأموال في سبيل شراء ممكن قطعة غيار تكلف مثلا $100 تصل إلى ليبيا $1000. طبعا كلها عن طريق السماسرة كما ذكر السيد دكتور ماتيو. وهنا حبيت أن أعرج بمثال بسيط على ما قاله. فالعقوبات تكبدناها كليبيين بخسارة فادحة جدا 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 في سبيل قضايا ليس لها بها علاقة كمواطنين طبعا ليبيين، ولكن التعنت الإمبريالي كان ضرره كبير على الشعب الليبي في فترة ال70 و80 و90 وحتى الألفينات، ولا زلنا نعاني منه لحد الآن. شكرا لكم.
Thank you very much, Mr. Altumi. So we are getting towards the end of our hearing today, but I believe there are maybe one more question. But preceding this, I'd like to ask a question of my own, if I may. Alongside being part of the steering committee for the Tribunal, I'm also a special rapporteur for Africa. And I was very much compelled by some of the testimony from Mr. Fitori earlier, especially and as well as Dr. El-Sadawi, and bringing up the role of bringing in the role of military interests into this, and the relationship with AFRICOM. And I particularly wanted to highlight, it was brought up the renationalization of Wheelus Air Base and the resulting sanctions subsequent to this, and that struck an interest for me, because of course there is a perhaps analogous situation in Eritrea with the nationalization of Kanu Station, which was a very important U.S. intelligence installation in Eritrea. We will be having our hearing for Eritrea on May 6th and 7th of this year, and I will repeat the question then. But I was wondering if anyone wanted to speak to perhaps whether or not there is a specific discernible strand of sanctions that are directly related to challenges to United States quote unquote full spectrum dominance in the military sphere. Yes, Mr. Fitori.
Thank you. Thank you. Of course, there's it's directly related. It's part of the U.S. hegemony, if you like, and wish for dominance across the globe. So, for example, the project of the African Union, for example, was supposed to come complete, especially by this time, by having its own military force after the Peace Council of the African Union was formed, I believe, in early 2022 or something, 2002, I mean, around that date. And the idea of building united armed services, army across Africa, whereby it will be capable of peacekeeping and operating across the continent without the intervention from outside forces, especially former colonial powers like France and the UK, and lately, of course, increasingly the United States. It was an essential and integral part of the entire project of the European Union. So the Americans did not like this. And I remember sometime in 99, I think, or 2000 maybe, I attended an AFRICOM civilian event in Stuttgart, where the headquarters of the AFRICOM is in Germany. And the commander of AFRICOM at the time was a four-star general by the name William Ward. And he told us about, his visit to North Africa. It was the first such a visit by somebody from Africa, where he went to Algeria, Tunisia, and then went to Egypt, and then came to Libya. And he was telling us his experience in meeting Gaddafi. He was scheduled to have a meeting for about 20 minutes, and instead it went on for an hour. And he said, the moment he came into the place, into the tent where I was waiting to see him, to meet him, he asked me, Gaddafi asked him, are you here in Africa looking for military bases for Africa? Still standing, both men. And Mr. Juror said, no, I am not here for bases. I'm just coming to introduce myself and meet you, and just like I did in Egypt and other countries. After that, Gaddafi said, okay, you can sit down now, we can talk. We have to note two things in the military sphere. One is the Sahel and Sahara community, which was founded by Libya and led by Gaddafi, financed too much by Libya, the headquarters in Tripoli. It was made up of something like 39 countries, African countries, and it was in charge of the about to start to take charge in the security of the Sahel region, the African Sahel region. That whole thing collapsed after 2011, and now the Sahel community, as the French call it, is actually made up of 5 countries, the most the poorest, ill-equipped, weakest countries in the Sahel. Why? Because the original idea of the Sahel community founded by Libya was not something the Americans or the French like very much. So another thing, it was almost impossible actually for any country in Africa, across the continent, with the exception of few, of course, to allow the existence of American military bases under the leadership of AFRICOM before 2011. Libya would, the moment they hear something like this, they would lead a very harsh and very active campaign and convince other countries, Africa to do the same, to reject the idea of having foreign bases, especially American foreign bases in the continent. After 2011 and the destruction of Libya, the whole thing has changed. And we already have, American bases all over the continent. There's one in Niger, just south of Libya, for unmanned flying vehicles, drones, specifically for drones, to look over the area, southern Libya and the entire Sahel region. and the one in Djibouti, I guess, or somewhere else, if I remember correctly, the American base, I mean, under AFRICOM is expanding, and there's a very lively idea, is being debated every now and then by the American side, the military side, to transfer the entire AFRICOM headquarters from Germany to somewhere in Africa, maybe Djibouti or somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitori. I also see a hand from Mr. Okogli.
Yeah.
It's Okogli.
Yes, thank you so much, Jeremy. Just to add to what Dr. Matteo just mentioned earlier, that after the obliteration of the Libyan army and the Libyan state in 2011, you have created a vacuum of security. And Karina Mullen, Karina, who was here earlier, has written about security dependency, that you create a destruction in a country in order to make that country dependent on other countries' security. And so who comes in after 2011? You have the European forces. They come closer to Libya. They start Operation Frontex to expand its borders southwards towards Libya and the Mediterranean. And now you have Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, those pacifist countries, allegedly operating in the Sahel, in the central. And I want to highlight something that I'm pretty sure that it will be spoken about in the Venezuela hearing, is that roughly a year and a half ago, Alex Saab, who is a diplomat from Colombia, was flying from South Africa to Iran and then to Venezuela. His plane, civilian plane, was intercepted and downed in Western Africa. And then he was kidnapped and extradited to the United States. And so by AFRICOM. And so this is the AFRICOM right now. Its influence essentially, not just diplomatic and that's it, but right now it's using its military as a form of diplomacy and creating this need for security dependency, either on European Union Frontex operations or on the US's AFRICOM, as a way to kind of bring down the ability for Africans to control Africa. And then at the same time, unfortunately, it creates this need that everything that we cannot solve, it needs to be solved by somebody else. And I think this is what Murad tried to say earlier, that there was a plan for Libya and with Venezuela and Brazil and many other global South countries to start SATO, the South Atlantic Treaty Organization. And is this a thing of the past that just happened with only Alex Saab only? Unfortunately not. And I think Mustafa, maybe some other hearing or something like that on the side some other day, we can talk about what happened on the 11th of December of 2022, where a Libyan civilian was kidnapped from his house and then was driven to a military base and then flown by the AFRICOM to face charges of allegations of Lockerbie. His name is Masoud Bouajela. And so this is the AFRICOM still expanding, and not just in terms of like political economy, but it's really creating this destruction in order to accumulate more wealth of it and creating this security dependency essentially. Yes, and so that's kind of my answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have one last question, and it's actually coming from the audience here today. There's a dialogue going on surrounding a question of looting, and it was originally posed by Ms. Lilia Ghanem, who is a prominent anti-sanctions activist. We're grateful to have her participation in this hearing. And I'm wondering if perhaps Mr. Fitori or else Mr. Okoli would like to attempt to speak to this question.
So I'll try to understand. It's referring to the question of looting of Libyan assets. And myself, including Mustafa Fitori, we asked for clarification, but we didn't get that clarification of what she means by looting of Libyan assets. What we understand is that there are sanctions, and Libya has in the US has 34 billions that are frozen since 2011, and they have been used like a loan without interest rates, essentially. And then you have 70 roughly in Europe. And those ones, they're the ones that Mustafa Fitori and Dr. Matteo spoke about, is that they are, despite the fact that they're frozen, they're still required to pay interest rates. And then the third thing is that the investments across Africa, be it in development of dams, roads, agriculture, or whatever, they're frozen, and most of those projects are nationalized or either sold as auctions. And recently there has been a hotel, and I think in Tanzania, was sold for, you know, breadcrumbs, essentially, for the original price. And so now if we lift the sanctions, and I know this is a debate that we can have, like, should we lift the sanctions, knowing that we have corrupt compradors who are running the country that are parachuted by the UN? That's the question, that what will happen to these assets? Will actually Libya be gaining some earnings from these things, or surplus capital, essentially, from these investments? So that's kind of, I think, a broad answer, but maybe Matthew, you want to add?
No, I think it was a great answer, Sam. They're being looted by sanctions, by by courts cases, by companies also that are claiming back money from the previous Libyan government, saying, you know, we received this contract, it has not been paid, we want the money back. And they are pursuing these lawsuits against the previous government as well, to loot the money of the country. So there are multiple ways that this is happening. Also, as well as we were saying, through the designation of certain groups as terrorists, you know, and going back into history to reclaim this money.
Thank you very much. And this, I have a response as well by Mr. Fitori. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just thank you, Sam, for the perfect answer you provided, and Matteo, of course. But I want to add something here. The looting of the Libyan assets, especially abroad, started early on, from the late 2011, and continued in different formats, you know, using different techniques even today. And we remember, most Libyans, at least, or close watchers of Libya must remember this, that Mustafa Abdel and Mahmoud Jibril, the late Mahmoud Jibril, who used to run the National Transitional Council from late 2011 until the end of 2011 until the end of 2012, after the elections, first election of the National Congress, they formed the committee that opened the doors for any individual or entity, a person, or anything that can bring back the Gaddafi money, as they call it then, not the Libyan money, but they call it the Gaddafi money, to make the case, of course, that it is finances, you know, looted by Gaddafi himself. Of course, that's nonsense. Anyway, and they offered something like 10%, you know, if you bring information, you know, about accounts abroad and how much money there is. And there were a lot of people who were, you know, working very actively in this, and some of them have been successful, you know, and got very rich overnight, because they reported back in accounts that they were not known to the late Mahmoud Jibril, nor to Mr. Mustafa Abdel. So that somehow legitimized, if you like, the looting, which took different forms and you know, had its own life since then, and still goes on. And today, one of the things they do to loot the money outside is that they get letters of credit from the central bank to import, for example, say Coca-Cola or something from this country or that country. And in fact, they don't go on and import the Coca-Cola or whatever commodity they were asked to import or authorized to import. What they do instead is falsify the documents to show that they actually did import the certain that required the commodity or product or whatever. But that did not happen. And they collect the money, hard currency, dollars or euros or whatever, and bring it back to the country and sell it in the black market. So that creates a kind of knock-on effect in other things, prices, inflation, and hard to find hard currency, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitori. We have reached the end of the hearing for today. I want to thank all of our expert witnesses. I want to thank all of our jurists, our rapporteurs, all of the audience members and participants, and most of all, the people of Libya for engaging with us in this manner. And we hope, of course, always that this tribunal process leads to liberatory moves and relief from the effects of these economic coercive measures. Before we leave, I would be remiss also if I do not give a big thanks to our translators for today's hearing, without which we would not have been able to have access to this vital information. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day, afternoon, evening, depending on what time zone you are in. We hope to see you at the next hearing.